Welcome to the Basingstoke Makerspace. I'm Fred, for those of you that don't know, and tonight I'm going to be showing you all a little bit about leatherworking. I'd like to start by thanking Steve Horton, one of the directors here who's been super instrumental in setting this all up, as well as Andy Pugh, another director who's also been really helpful. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for coming. For those of you watching at home, please feel free to drop in any Tuesday from 7 p.m. onwards for one of our open evenings. Without further ado, let's get started.
Alrighty.
Right, so today we'll be learning a little bit about the brief history of leatherworking. It's a little snapshot, not all inclusive. I'll be showing you all how to make a card holder with the help of tonight's victim. Willing volunteer, Andy.
I was coerced.
I also have a limited supply for those of you afterwards who'd like to have a go at yourself. We have partially constructed card holders to finish later in the evening. If you want to have a go, it's first come, first serve, so let me know so I can do that. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Leathercraft projects you can make with the skills we're learning tonight. Hopefully, a little something for everybody here. Right. So what is leatherworking? Leatherworking is making animals out of tanned animal hide. Nowadays, there are also alternatives to using animals such as veg tan. Leatherwork dates back as far as 400,000 years ago, and that's when there is evidence of early humans scraping fur off of animal skins in order to tan them. However, the first bone awl, which is one of those, which we'll be looking at a bit more later tonight, was only 84,000 years ago, so much shorter. And 84,000 is roughly the amount of years I'm expecting it to teach Andy how to do this tonight.
Yeah.
So, right.
That was a true word being spoken.
So some of the early history of leatherworking. During the Stone Age, this is where we see the first shoes. So pictured here is the oldest pairs of shoes ever found. These were recently discovered in about 2008. And they are 5,500 years old. And what I think is really special about these, and they're called the Areni 1, because that's the cave where they were found, is that actually that design of shoe is still made today, and it's been made through a lot of human history, especially when you're looking at Mediterranean Turkish cultures, shoes where the binding is on the front of the shoe, which I think is really special. That I like stuff that links us all. Right, okay, so then moving on into the Iron Age, we can see a major change, because this is when blacksmiths can construct specialised tools in order to make more specialised products. This is where we start seeing construction not just for functionality like shoes and tents, but also for fashion, to denote social status. And this is when leatherwork really becomes an artistic tradition. In the 8th century, Romans used leather to create clothing, shields, shoes, belts, harnesses, boots, saddles, and tents. And this was primarily for the military. So this is where we have a lot of these, actually, that we can still see today in all sorts of museums across the world. So they're brilliant.
They resemble a pair of slippers I used to have before they fell off my feet.
Yeah, no, I do genuinely think that sort of those shoes. I think we've all got one in the back of the cupboard like that. We keep saying we're going to give to the charity shop, but we just might think we use them. At least I do. Right, in the Middle Ages, leatherwork was used to create clothing, knife sheaths, shoes, parchment, saddles, books, and boxes. The designs become rather detailed and actually at times rather ornate. And during the next few centuries as well, we see development in skills such as moulding, carving, painting, stamping, and tooling. And this is where I love this book. So this was bound in 1568, and it's actually a journal, almost like a biography a bloke privately had made of himself. So a little bit of an ego there, but absolutely gorgeous book. Absolutely gorgeous, one of my favourites. Okay, and then, major changes particularly take place during the Industrial Revolution. And of course, that's where we see a lot of change to textile and fashion industry in general. But actually, even the industry machinery itself had leather belts inside it to keep it running. So a lot of machinery actually used leather inside the workings. And then, as I said, a little brief history, so we're going to skip right back up to today. So we've gone from early man to Andy.
Well, Neolithic man.
Neolithic man, yes. I can't say there's a huge difference that I can see, but that's personal, so... Right, so as you can see, we've got part of the demonstration in an embedded video up here on the screen. So feel free to have a look at Andy's, what he's doing, or up here on the screen, which is a recorded video. Whatever you prefer, as long as I'm not all crowding around Andy, giving him pressure. So I've already done the first 2 steps of these patterns, which is designing them, and we've just glued them together. And a little handy trick for when you're new, that I've discovered, is using PVA glue. Because you can get washable PVA glue. It's cheap, it's easy to apply easily, and with a little bit of water it comes away if you make a mistake. So that has been my little hack at the moment.
And very handy for keeping it in place while you're stitching as well.
Yeah.
So it's not flapping around.
Yeah, a lot easier, especially when we're... So this is folded over, not 2 pieces. This is 1 piece folded. So the glue is needed in order to start stitching, or it's just going to keep opening itself. Right, so I'll be explaining each step. Andy, feel free to follow along.
I will indeed.
Yes, my Padawan. There we go. So here, we're talking about why we're trimming the edges first. So we've got a nice clean edge on one side, and then the other edge is still very messy. And the reason why we do this is if we're using wing dividers, which are these, and you've got more modern forms as well, when you're following the tooth along, you'll get a really wobbly line on a wobbly edge. You need a nice straight one to make a nice straight line. And that is to mark for our stitch line. So here we've got a craft knife that I'm using, a rotary cutter, which is better for thinner leather. And you can also just, of course, use scissors or shears. It's all just preference. I personally, when I'm doing a nice straight line, just prefer a simple craft knife. So Andy's cut his nice and straight, so... On to our next video. So when you are trimming, you don't really want to take too much of it away because it defeats the purpose of the card holder, and you only get a 1/3 card holder. So just a teeny slither just to make things even. So one gentle pass through, just to mark where we're going, and then a couple more with firmer pressure. Different levers, different pressures. A lot of it's just feeling about. There we go, nice straight edge. So I'm going to show you how to use the wing dividers first. We have 2 methods for marking our stitch line. So we're going to do the wing dividers first. So that's our nice straight line, and we're going to mark. And I've decided on 2mm here, because a nice rule of thumb for how far in you want your stitching to be is actually the width of your 2 pieces of leather together. And that's 2mm. So you press one side of the tooth again, and guide it down, and it's hard to see, especially in the back. We've got a nice shiny line, which is just enough for you to see in order to mark where you do your stitches. Yeah. And then the other method, which both Andy and I found out that we prefer, is using a ruler and chisel.
Where's the chisel?
Here they are.
Oh, of course.
So these are actually part of our chisel stamping sets for punching holes. So we're measuring 2mm in.
And we have different headed forks, if you like, you'll see shortly.
And we're just going to measure 2mm in and score really, really lightly. These are very sharp tools. And we don't want to cut. We definitely don't want to tear the finish of this leather. It's got a bit of finish on top of it, this one. And I'm quite proud of this. I actually made this little holder. It's one of the first things I made with Leatherworking Steels only a few weeks ago. And it's actually turned out pretty decently, I think.
It's like a little camping fork set.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. Though I wouldn't, it doesn't quite work as a spork, so I'd keep your regular plastic stuff. Okie doke. So now we get the really fun bit. Hitty, hitty, smash, smash. Right. So we have a marking, a nice mat here for cutting. It's not enough for when we're doing an impact to punch holes. So we've put down a little bit of chipboard, which is just a little bit, just enough so that we don't go straight through. So using the stitch line that we have marked out, we're going to pick a chisel. We could do, you know, a smaller set of 1 or 2 if we were going around a curve. With a straight line, you just go for the biggest tool. And then you give it a nice tripod shaking smash right there.
It's like Thor's hammer.
Yeah, give it a nice heft. Nicely done. And we're going through both sides of the leather.
Yep, can see on that side as well.
So if you see on the video, when I'm placing my next hone along, I could just go along the line. But in order to make sure my stitches are all uniform, I'm placing in the final hole of what I've just done, the first little prong of our punches. And Andy's just going to carry on along, and for those of you drinking tea, hold on to your mugs.
Do apologise, it's not an earthquake.
That's good hair, brilliant. You will find at times that you are slightly in the chipboard and have to yank it out.
Yeah.
I just like to think of it in Arthurian legend, just in recreation. Pulling the sword out of the chipboard. Almost like they did. Almost like.
Yeah, that would be it. Right, there we go. So this is the final.
And just like what with marking our stitch line, there's loads of other methods. You can even punch one by one with an awl, which is quite handy for detailed work or specific little curvy structures. But when we're doing an even straight line for a nice beginner piece, these are perfect.
Other mallets are available, so you don't need to use this heavy one. But,
just depends how confident you are.
A few more smacks.
How confident you are and how much you like your thumbs and things like that. Right, so the holes we've got here are nice and evenly spaced. But we're going to be putting waxed thread through. And we want to make sure that we've got loads of room. We'll be putting 2 needles at a time. Sorry, 1 needle but 2 threads at a time through each hole. So they need to be nice and wide. And the way I like to make sure is getting in one of our awls here. We've got various sizes, various types. I mean, you could even use a toothpick in a pinch. We're just going to pop that through. And in our video we can see.
The feature of this is it obviously gets wider. So the idea is the further we put in, the wider the hole.
Yeah. Depending on how much thread you're putting through, how big a needle you're using, the leather. Again, one of those things that you get a feel for the more you play around.
So as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm poking it through each time. I'll just work away along.
And you can see on our video here the difference between the hole I haven't punched, a tiny little dot, and a nice big round hole for where we want to go stitching through it. And it just makes it a little easier on yourself for going through.
Certainly does.
And of course, you could skip the hole punching and just do entirely awls when doing this. We've got some really sharp ones here for that. But like I said, even stitch line, nice straight lines, it does all make it worthwhile in the end, these extra steps.
Yeah, it makes a big difference to the speed and accuracy of the workpiece. So.
Especially if you're not perhaps accustomed to sewing at all, this is a definite must.
Yeah.
Because Andy was a little new to some of the needles, whereas I'm more of an experienced sewer.
I struggle to put a button on, so this is all good for me. New skills.
New skills. No, who said they can't teach an old dog new tricks?
Yeah. Woof woof.
He really is. He really is. But he volunteered.
I'll be rolling over for my belly to be tickled later, so watch out.
Okie doke. Right. So the next thing, because Andy is just coming up to those last few holes, aren't you there?
I am indeed.
Is we've got a nice range of colours here. We've got, I really like this quite blonde sort of colour, a little bit tan, a nice brown, and this is already pre-waxed, which is handy. So normally you would take a block of wax and pass your thread through, and that means it not only goes in through the leather easier to begin with, but it's actually less likely to come out on its own. But yeah, this is already pre-done, which is nice and handy. And it's synthetic as well, which is handy for finishing off. Right, next step. So we need to know about measuring our thread. So about 5'3", 5'2", 5'4" on a good day. Sorry, but measuring our thread.
Did you get that?
But sorry, that was a terrible one. I do apologise. You want to make sure you don't have too little, but also not too much, because too much you can end up with a bunch of knots and things like that. So you see here, the needles we've got, for those of you sewers may be unfamiliar, they're not straight, they are in fact curved. We have 2 needles, and we are using 2 at once on one singular piece of thread, like this, like so. Here, Andy, you can
Thank you very much.
There's a few more videos. So when it comes to...
How long should the thread...
That's right, just coming on to this. So with the measuring the thread, an easy way to do it is just tripling up the distance that you're doing.
Right.
So we've done about a triple of the
two,
length of this product.
yeah.
Yeah. Because that gives you, you're going to need at least double, because we're going in an X path. We are doubling up on ourselves, so we need double the thread. But triple just means you've got room to maneuver and you're not bending awkwardly at the end when you're running out. Right, so the first stitch, what we're going to do is going to take needle A, as we're going to call it, and pop it through the first hole of our line of stitching. Slide it through.
Yep.
Just like Andy's doing as well. Fantastic. And when we pull it through, you want to make sure that there is about equal thread on either side in each needle, A and B on either side of your piece. And then with that same needle, needle A, pull through the second hole.
So go to the second hole from the other side, of course.
And ignore the little twist that forms in the leather here. It's another perk of waxed thread. If it does tangle on itself, it's super easy to pull apart. Right. So you can see where we've ended, we have needle A and needle B on the same side of the leather. And there's a specific reason why we're doing this. And that's because normally when you are doing saddle stitching, which is the name of the stitch, you would have what is called a stitching pony, wedging your piece together. And this is so you can take both needles at the same time and stitch in, out, shake it all about. Please ignore that. And the way we're going to recreate this without a stitching pony, which makes it a bit more mobile, a bit quicker as well if you're doing a small piece like this, is we're going to do holding the tension from needle A, we're holding that tension with our thumb. If we don't hold it, we can just keep pulling, and suddenly we're out of our thread and we pulled it all the way through. So using our thumb that's holding onto the leather, we pin down the thread from needle A, and we take needle B into our second hole alongside the piece of thread already there from needle A and push through. And this will leave us with a complete stitch on either side. And next...
Like so, yeah.
There we go. And next is taking needle B and going through the third hole to come back onto the same side so that our needles are both once again living on the same side as one another. And the way we do this is we sort of alternate back and forth. So we take needle A and we stitch alongside, holding tension, and then we take needle B and we go through again, and it's just back and forth until you've reached all the way at the end. And it's actually, once you've got the knack for it, which took Andy, I may make fun of him, but it only took him about 5-10 minutes. Intensive training. About 5 minutes just getting through, getting a hang of it, and he's not an experienced sewer whatsoever. So
very, very straightforward and easy, and anybody with half a brain cell would be easily able to do it.
You have half a brain cell, where?
Only just.
sorry, so cruel.
So I swap over again.
Yeah.
And I feed that into there. So we've got going back into the same hole, which is generated.
And it's nice to see Andy's absolutely very confidently doing this. And all the stitching he's done before is just the other side. That's the only practice he's had. So it's nice and intuitive.
Yeah, that's what I did.
Nice and handy.
In the Blue Peter tradition, this is what I prepared earlier, this one here. So,
Stole my line. See, this is why I bully him.
Oh, sorry.
No, but yeah, so while Andy's doing it, it is going to take a little while. So I'm going to explain the final step of this piece that Andy won't be able to do until a few minutes later. But I'm going to explain it to you guys now, just using the video. So what you'll need for this is some water, and this is our burnishing tool. So when we burnish leather, what we're doing is heating up the fibres to get them to release their natural oils. Even veg tan has them. Releasing their natural, they come to the surface. And after a few minutes of back and forth rubbing, using a bit of water on our finger, dampening only a small area. So I've not done the whole, not the whole piece, just an inch, working in small sections. Get it a little bit damp just to aid to the movement we can do at the speed. And that we can see with my nail here is trying to find the grain of the leather, which of course, because it's folded back on itself, we've got one going one direction, one going the other. So in this case, isn't really relevant. But yeah, water so it's nice and moist, but not damp, not sopping. Taking our burnishing tool, fitting into the multiple size grooves that match up the size of our leather, and just back and forth. And this video is a little sped up, only a tad, but just go at the pace that works you for as long as it takes. So doing that small section would take about 5 minutes, just that small section. And that is, of course, quite a lot of man hours and quite a lot of muscle in the bicep after a while. But you can absolutely have a finished, polished leather piece without burnishing. And for those of you who are happy to use a power Dremel for, less traditional techniques, you can just reduce the sandpaper on the Dremel into a finer and finer sandpaper grit, doing it that way, and it's far faster. I've even seen people use belt sanders and belt sanders at an angle to create curves and back and forth, and it's not necessarily my way of doing things. My way of doing things is very clearly the more traditional way. I like to do things with my hands, but this hobby is extremely personalizable. So you can pick the way you want to do things, finding what's best. It's so fun to play around with once you get going.
And of course, if you want to open an Etsy store, you could always get some equipment to speed it along.
It's always great. Makerspace is always great for trying out a hobby before you commit. You're having a bit of trouble there. Yeah, you can always, as Ursula suggested, go through as you're doing. So while Andy works away as a beathering away, I'm going to show you some of the things we can craft. This is a very limited selection of just accessories, modern fashionable items, belts, wallets, handbags, as well as little camera cases for the photographers here, as well. And we've also got some bracelets, some watch straps for the more rebellious amongst you. There's jackets, leather long dusters, matrix style skirts, braces, and trousers for the the bit more alternative. And speaking of alternative, I think I've very much got the audience of a nerdy background here, of everyone who likes a little bit of everything. And you really do have a little bit of everything here. So we've got some steampunk. This is all of this jacket, these braces, goggles down here, all easily made because there's patterns on the internet for free majority of the time. A lot of them £3 to £5 on Etsy for an entire leather jacket pattern to download and print. There's video instructions on YouTube and all kinds of other social media sites for you to get a grips of what you're doing. So you don't even have to come up with your own design. You can just make what's already out there. I mean, I'm quite a big fan of these bracelets and these books that you would use in live action role playing, like LARP, which would, of course, is sort of more fantasy, less steampunk, more like elves and orcs and such. But you've also got some more like quirky fashion pieces. Like I'm absolutely in love with these leather flip-flops. I think they're really fun to make, that you would be using to, you punch a hole in them and you'd fit some rivets, or you'd use a stud gun as it might have been there. There's a lot of customizable bits here. One of my favourite things, as anyone who's talked to me here knows, is visible mending and repairing. And I'm very into reducing the textile waste that goes to landfill. So a lot of us already own half of these products up here with our wallets and belts. We're going to have majority of these at home. And these tools and just some basic sewing skills are brilliant for mending all sorts of things that you might have. If your belt, you need a new loop on because you've lost weight. If you need a new hole in there. Or if your watch strap wears away. Yeah, or put on weight. We don't body shame. But with watch straps as well, if they wear away over time, but you just want to get a new one in, but the manufacturer's closed down, great, you just make your own. Make your own. As most of the people in this room I know can attest to is the way to do things. So it's a great way to sort of get a grips with things that you can customizable hobby, great for mending. Also, the skills are quite transferable to sewing if you want to be using any of the other equipment we have here. One of the things I did that isn't on the videos, but is on our ones here, is I've used our laser cutter to engrave our little Makerspace logo on here, little vector that is engraved on there. Took about 10 minutes fiddling around. And leather is one of those things that you can combine with a lot of other skills. So laser cutting, you don't have to just engrave, you can cut out your patterns with it. If you find a pattern on the internet you like, download it, put it into a vector, use it on the laser cutter, done, just start sewing. Handy thing there is where it's cutting, it'll actually burn the leather enough that it will, hopefully not burning and destroying your leather. A bit of masking tape helps there, it's a tip from Alex. But if you're using to cut it, it will already burnish the edge, so you don't have to spend all that time rubbing away. It's already finished up that way. And you can also, not necessarily with most leather, but some thinner leather would work through our industrial sewing machine as well. Not to mention you can 3D print little gadgets and have a nice little holder for them. Make your own little handle for your tools, your belts and things like that. Absolutely handy for when you need something and you need only you will have it. So my personal project that I'm be working on now, I know how to do this, is I want an absolutely goofy design of where I want a, like the old cowboy X-back halters that come under each arm, gun, ammo in the other. It would be wallet keys, wallet phone on either side. And I want to make one. That doesn't exist, not even on Etsy.
Yeah.
So I'd have to make it on my own. And being able to do that, these tools here, 5 minutes of YouTube videos, and I know what I'm doing, and I can get started. It won't look great, but if I'm honest, not much I do does, and that's half the point. Handmade.
Rustic, I think is the word.
Rustic, yes.
So,
authentic, character. Yeah.
Well, I write for cosplay and things like that. I recently made my wife a holster for her Jyn Erso from Star Wars costume when we went to a Star Wars nerd fest, and I had to use a plastic holster which we got online, and I sprayed it. Now, if I'd had these skills at the time, I would have knocked up my own one. So
yeah, because you can dye the
next
leather,
time.
you can buy leather exactly the type you want. I mean, if you're a bit more on the budget side of things, and again it works into that that mending and repair, you can go down to a charity shop, and often you'll find more worn leather jackets that real leather, but they're not worth what they used to be because they've worn away in certain places.
Yeah.
And just getting a thread unpicker from a sewing kit and going around, or using scissors and just being brutal, you can cannibalize, as I call it, the leather already there. Handbags, one thing I'll say when you're doing it is I wouldn't use coat leather to make a handbag.
No.
I'd use coat leather to make a coat, or handbag leather to make a handbag, because they do lend to themselves a bit better
too
that
soft
way.
and
You can also use warm water and mould leather around stuff for, say, a holster or a sheath.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, loads of things. Alex has got some a leather water holder, I believe. It's a little, and a tankard as well.
A knife sheath and an axe.
Knife sheath and an axe sheath. Yeah, I think it's very almost like Viking, which is coming into the fashion again at the moment. That Norse sort of things. Right. So as Andy is almost finishing up there,
Yep.
I'd like at this point, if you've got any questions for me, please feel free to ask. I'll do my best, though my answer may just be, I don't know. I started this hobby 4 weeks ago. But if there are, I'd love to answer them. Hello?
How do you actually finish the sewing off so it doesn't come unraveled again?
That is a great question. So I didn't want to film this because I don't want my arsenic tendencies to come over. But because this is synthetic thread, if you've got a lighter, a Zippo is perfect, or just a lighter that you can hold down, I wouldn't use a match or an open flame because it's not as stable. You can just take the end, and I did it on these, you just take the end and you hold it close, not on the flame, but nearby, and it will very quickly shrink. Just sort of like shrink heat wrap plastic, and you press firmly with it, not with your thumb, but just any piece of, like, the tool handle of a tool, of your mallet, and you press it in, and that plastic will mould in. If you're using actual cotton thread, I wouldn't suggest that you'll just burn it and it will smell awful.
Yeah.
But you can, instead, in that instance, just backstitch a few times, tuck the leather in as best you can, and then cut it really close. As it's waxed thread, you can, with a little bit of sort of the heat of your hand and your thumb, press it into what's already there, and the wax thread will stop it from pulling away. Just using that to manipulate the shape helps a lot.
Thank you very much.
In the back as well, got another question?
The supply of leather, what do you buy and what do you ask for?
Yeah, that's some great questions. So I think online, there's so much variety, but there isn't necessarily always an expert to go to. So where I've got the leather we're using today, actually, it's surplus, it's scrap.
Yeah.
And I spoke to a leather worker about what surplus they had, what it had been used for, and whether they thought it'd be suitable for the projects I had in mind. So even you could be a bit cheeky and go to your local cobbler and repairer. So even Timpson, sometimes they can, if you are very polite, they're willing to give you tiny bits of scrap, which you could cut up, make a bracelet, and they can give you advice. The best thing to do is just ask other makers at all opportunities. What did you make this with? What do you suggest? If you're buying a pattern, reach out to the creator and say, what leather do you suggest I do this with? If you want a vegetarian alternative, well, vegetarian, not eating them, hopefully not. But an animal-free alternative, you can normally ask about that. A lot of people are quite knowledgeable about these things. It's always great to just ask questions of everyone. That's how I've got the very limited, narrow knowledge base I have, is asking loads of questions and never shutting up once I know.
I've seen offcuts on eBay as well. eBay's sort of my first port of call for stuff like that. And Etsy, obviously, you can buy all sorts from, but it will tend to be probably more expensive.
There are some big retailers outside of Amazon as well.
There's a store in the UK called Identity Leather. It's like
Yeah.
the UK branch of Candy Leather.
Identity
It's quite
Leather has-
expensive, though.
Yeah, they are rather expensive. There's also, I believe it's, no skin, which is meaning that they are only vegetarian alternatives and vegan alternatives, meaning they use zero animal products. They even tried to use zero animal products in finishing the leather, which is quite hard because animal products work their way into everything. And they seem quite knowledgeable. They have a lot of feedback that you can give.
What material do you use if it's not leather?
A lot of it is actually sort of vegetable oils, essentially processed. Personally, this is just my own personal opinion here, I don't use vegetarian leather at all, because 9 out of 10 times it's actually made with plastic and polyester.
Yeah.
And while I don't mind using an odd bit of synthetic thread, especially when it's a beginner kit, I don't really like to use things that aren't made of natural fibres, because if we're trying to save the planet by not using an animal skin that we already had lying around anyway because we're eating it, I don't necessarily see the point in making something out of plastic that then stops the chain of it being able to decay and just makes more plastic waste. But that, again, that's my personal opinion there.
You see a lot of things made of PU leather, phone cases and stuff like that. Seems to be commonplace. I mean, my view is if you're going to do some cosplay type of thing, or you want to make something which is part of a costume, it might be a lot cheaper to do so, but don't throw it away, as long as it's going to be kept for...
Exactly. So you can see Andy's nearly finished his card holder in the time that we've answered a few questions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to wrap things up here. Like I said, I've still got some more. If anyone wants to have a go later on tonight, absolutely, yep. And I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you everyone for coming and for listening, lending your ears and all that. So on behalf of the Makerspace, thank you and good night.
Thanks everyone. There we go.